It all started when I had my first encounter with Pablo Neruda's works. While reading through his collection of poems, many vivid and impressive scenes and pictures emerged in my mind, as if I was watching a film written by him and directed by myself. For example, in If You Forget Me, images like the crystal moon, red branches, and the slow autumn together create a surreal yet very attracting atmosphere. And I am in the center of all this, with the wind in autumn blowing, the colorful sceneries around, and the temperature of my body close to the flame. His poems brought me into the world he portrayed, and I can almost automatically visualize all the contents Neruda intended to convey. Then I came to realize that there is a strong similarity between poem and video, in the sense that they are both forms of media that, through texts and images, help audiences to reconstruct the scene that the poet or director was experiencing, and thereby invoke people's empathy for the emotions and feelings that the author was having. So I began to consider if I could combine these two forms of art and create a new media, moving poems. However, I was not entirely clear about the concepts of poem, poetry, and video. So to experiment my idea, I started to compose poems, and she was my first piece of work. It recorded my thoughts and emotions on life, and it made me realize that the intention of the very early poets was simply to capture and express the emotions associated with their observations of life. Yet, limited by the undeveloped technology back then, they could only record the scenes observed in words, and in turn, readers had to construct the described scenes in their own minds through mere imaginations. This prompted me to think that since words are more abstract than images or videos, I can potentially focus on replacing words with videos while preserving the core characteristics of a poem to bring readers closer to poets' original intention and eliminate the troublesome process of transforming from scenes to texts and to imagination, so that poems can have more direct visual and emotional impacts on the audiences. Poem, as a literature genre, is rhythmic, concise, and diversiform in structure. It is often used to reflect life and express emotions. Andrei Tarkovsky wrote the following in his book, Sculpting in Time. When I speak of poetry, I am not thinking of it as a genre. Poetry is an awareness of the world, a particular way of relating to reality. Video, on the other hand, is an electric media used to record, duplicate, and display dynamic visual contents. But how to combine these two very different art forms together? The answer lies within their core concepts. Poems often embed deeper messages behind the portrayed objects or images, allowing readers to draw on their own imaginations to interpret. As a result, they perceive an artistic conception rather than some specific stories. Artworks in form of video often attempt to do the same. As opposed to films, they lack strong narrations and push audience to imagine and interpret to their own likings. They emphasize on metaphors by using editing techniques such as repetition, overlaying, and toning. At the same time, they also use background music and sound effects to enhance the rhythm and emotions of videos, creating a certain atmosphere for the audience to feel and think. In short, poems and videos both focus on feelings rather than meanings. The discovery of this interesting connection encouraged me to explore further along the line, and I indeed have found many works and references which also attempt to exploit the connection between poetry and video. For example, Kamal Henrod's The Strife of Love in a Dream is made up of a series of random footages of pilgrimage, the production of anti-anxiety medication, and the extraction of snake venom. They are all, though sometimes randomly, associated with humans' fight against fear. And when people see these images editing in the montage way, they are expected to arouse thoughts on disease, death, and faith. Also, the image of snakes is repeatedly shown as an animalized symbol of fear. All this together contribute to its aim of rendering this horrific atmosphere as a poem would normally do. And as mentioned above, apart from utilizing symbolic and figurative footages, a video can attain poetic characteristic through background sound and editing. James Richards' Radio at Night is a good example, where he experimented with the technique of video collage, just posing completely irrelevant scenes, including surgeons working, dead pigs hanging from hooks, and microscopic images of hairs, and then accompanied these with a monotonous soundtrack. This conflict created a sense of time passing by. Moreover, Andrei Tarkovsky's film Mirror provided to us that a single video clip itself can be very poetic as well. The protagonist sits beside a well and watched the flames devour her wooden house. Since we cannot observe the facial expression of her, We can only imagine how she would feel in that circumstances. And with the virid forest constructing with red flames, this scene is almost a textbook for poetic. Admittedly, these materials above are good evidence of poetic videos, yet they are still not moving poems in my opinion. Poetic videos focus on a specific theme that they wish to convey, while they're being poetic in almost a side product. Moving poems, however, emphasize on poems, whereas video is merely the form through which the poems are delivered. To the End of Things 5 Mountains by Martin Hislop and Helen Tukey, in my opinion, is a typical example of moving poems, where videos effectively replaced words to compose a poem of the beautiful landscapes. The two artists collaged footages of sceneries as if each strip of scenes represents a verse, and by combining these verses, a lovely poem emerged in the form of video collage, consisting of images of great mountains, boundless sky, and overgrown forests. This piece of work enlightened me in terms of what key qualities a moving poem should possess. First, it has to demonstrate an apparent attempt to stimulate the structure and rhythm of a poem. Secondly, it has to compress of independent moving images that are not narrative. Last but not least, it needs to embed certain emotions or perceived feelings of the author and work as a media for him or her to communicate these to the audiences. Stimulating structure and rhythm of a written poem with video may sound like complete madness at first glance, yet it is proven possible by many artistic experiments. I have mentioned the segmentation of video to imitate verse in To the End of Things. In fact, many artists tend to do the same, and indeed, it is the easiest to structure the visual in form of a poem. Just divide them into different parts. So, not surprisingly, works in the field of moving poems almost always utilize collage and montage. However, the imitation of poems format can be more elaborate than that. In Rhea Starr's Junkanoo Talk, she approached this matter through editing breathing sounds in the background as if a person is reading the poem. In the inhales and exhales create a rhythm, or more accurately, a reading pattern for the audience of this video, guiding them to breathe accordingly and feel this magical integration between poem and video. Meanwhile, other methods like designing the paths and intervals in editing can also make moving poems more poem-like. And now, approaches can be discovered via continued experiments. The fact that video clips in moving poems are not narrative makes them even more intriguing. They are vague, obscure, and metaphorical. They can be static or dynamic. They can be images of a bird, of a piece of moss, or a man mowing lawns. In order to make them more expressive, artists also perform aesthetic transformations on them. They are fragmentized, scattered, even disformed. They are endlessly repeated, cut hollow in the middle, overlaid on one another. A stove spitting out flames laid on the background of red shadows of trees. It gradually extinguishes while the other stove starts to ignite, and the red shadows of trees are still flying by. As for embedding emotions and feelings, moving poems, to an extent, should draw on the practice of both poems and films. Needless to say, poems are traditionally very good at conveying emotions using static images, and moving poem can simply present these expressive images in form of video clip and attain similar effects. For example, poems often depict the image of fire to hint a sense of anger, and video poems can choose to show a clip of roaring flames overlaid with unassociated right tone images. Film, on the other hand, have been adept at associating dynamic images with emotional keystones. In Mirror, Tarkovsky borrowed a footage from a documentary which shows a man manipulating an enormous hot air balloon flying towards the sky up above. At the same time, this footage is accompanied by silence. Though it may seem rather normal in the context of a documentary, the sudden silence made me lost in thought. The contrast between the little man and that gigantic balloon he was controlling overwhelmed me with a sense of helplessness, because it's just like the contrast between the world and me, who seems very small. Also, I feel a kind of insignificance and terror of our uniform internal death. Moving poems should attempt to achieve this type of cathartic effects. To sum up, many video works can be poetic, but they are not moving poems. However, moving poems depicts the poetry itself. All the images in the video simulate the rule of words in poetry. The video should meet at least 3 conditions in order to be called moving poems. The first quality among those 3 is use moving images instead of words to write poems, so as to shorten the distance between people and poetry. The second quality is use video to stimulate the rhythm of poems to create a sense of reading poems. The third quality is use moving image to enhance emotion, as it is one of the characteristics of poems. During the process of exploring poetry, I realized that poetry is profound and subjective concept. Although I have constructed the connection between poetry and video, and confirmed that it is possible and suitable to write poems through video, I think there is still a lot of space for the exploration of moving poems, as well as considering different formats. For example, to think about whether audio can work for the poetry or not.